There's something deeply unsettling about hearing a voice when you know you're alone, especially inside a place long left to rot. Abandoned buildings carry echoes of the past, but sometimes those echoes sound eerily alive. The following stories are all true accounts from people who followed voices they couldn't explain into empty factories, forgotten hospitals, and crumbling theaters. What started as curiosity quickly turned into terror. Because some voices don't lead you out, they lure you in. Story 1: The Nursery Voice. When I was 16, my older brother Liam got a job with a demolition crew working in rural Michigan. It wasn't glamorous, but the pay was solid, and he liked the idea of tearing buildings apart. One Friday, he invited me along to check out a site his team was preparing to demolish. A decrepit orphanage that had been abandoned since the 1970s. I said yes, because I wanted to hang out with him, and honestly, I thought it would be cool. You know? Creepy, but cool. The building sat about 20 minutes outside of town, swallowed up by thick trees and overgrown grass. It looked like something straight out of a horror film. 3 stories tall, windows shattered, the name St. Alora's Home for Children barely visible on a rusted metal sign by the gate. Liam's crew had finished assessing the structure earlier that week, but the real work wouldn't begin until Monday. The place was technically off limits, but Liam had keys and a flashlight, so we went in. The second we stepped inside, the air changed. It wasn't just cold, it was dense, like the whole building had been holding its breath for decades. Peeling wallpaper hung like wet skin from the walls. A few broken beds, cracked dolls, and old furniture were scattered throughout the first floor. The ceilings groaned under their own weight. Everything was coated in a layer of gray dust. Liam was snapping photos for the crew's records. I trailed behind him, exploring. We moved from room to room until we found ourselves in what used to be the nursery. It was on the second floor, at the end of a hallway that smelled like mildew and something sour. The nursery had pale yellow walls, faded with time and streaked with grime. There were still a few cribs lined up, some overturned. One of them had a stuffed rabbit in it, its eyes missing. That's when I heard it, a voice. It was faint, almost delicate, like someone humming a lullaby under their breath. I turned to Liam. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" he asked, distracted by his camera. "Someone singing." He stopped and looked at me. "There's no one here. This place is sealed." But I wasn't imagining it. The voice came again. It wasn't a song exactly. It was more like the sing-song voice kids use when playing. I couldn't understand the words, but it sounded childlike, sweet even. I followed it. Liam told me to wait up, but I was already halfway down a narrow hall connected to the nursery. The singing grew clearer as I moved, until I reached a door that was barely cracked open. The voice was coming from inside. Without thinking, I pushed it open. The room was small, some kind of storage area, but it looked different from the rest of the orphanage. It wasn't covered in dust. It wasn't decaying. The wallpaper was intact, the floor clean. There was a rocking chair in the corner moving back and forth on its own, and there were toys, clean, new-looking toys, spread across the floor. The voice stopped. I backed away, heart pounding. Then, suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, heavy. Liam burst in, panting. "Why the hell did you run off?" I turned back to the room to show him, but it had changed. Gone was the clean floor, the pristine toys, the moving chair. It was all dust and rot again. The toys were broken. The rocking chair was still. The wallpaper had peeled down in jagged strips. But there was something new, child-sized footprints in the dust, leading from the center of the room to the far wall. And there on that wall were scratches. Not deep, but deliberate. 4 words etched in a child's scrawl, "She sings you in." That's when we heard the voice again, just outside the room. But this time, it wasn't sweet. It was wrong. Glitchy, almost like a recording played backward and fast. It echoed through the hall, bouncing off the walls like it had nowhere to settle. Liam grabbed my arm and pulled me out. We sprinted back through the orphanage, through the first floor and out the main door, not stopping until we reached the car. Neither of us said much on the way home. We didn't go back, and Liam quit that job the following week. I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 nights later, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of a lullaby coming from my closet. My room was dark, the hallway light was off, my phone was dead. I froze. The song was muffled, but it was the same rhythm, the same tone. A child's voice, humming just loud enough to make out. I couldn't move for what felt like minutes. When I finally turned on my bedside lamp, the singing stopped. I checked the closet. Empty. But on the floor, in the corner, was a stuffed rabbit with no eyes. The same one I'd seen in the orphanage crib. I threw it out the next morning. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear that voice humming from inside the walls. Like it's trying to remind me, she sings you in. Story 2, Echoes in the Factory. James had always been obsessed with urban exploration, the art of delving into forgotten, decaying places left behind by time. As a photographer, he found beauty in rusted bolts, peeling paint, and shattered glass. There was something intoxicating about silence, echoing through vast, empty structures. That's what drew him one chilly Saturday evening to the old Milltown steel factory, long abandoned since the early 80s. The building had a reputation. Locals whispered about how the factory never really closed, that something inside had refused to let it die. There were stories of homeless squatters vanishing, of police officers who refused to investigate the place after dark, and of faint voices that could be heard when you walked past the main gate at night. But James wasn't the superstitious type. He arrived just before sunset, camera in hand and flashlight clipped to his backpack. The factory stood like a giant carcass of a dead beast, looming behind broken fencing and signs that read, "Danger! Do not enter." He ducked under a gap in the fence, adrenaline kicking in. The air smelled like mold, rust, and ash. The sound of his boots crunching glass echoed across the open loading bay. Inside, the facility was a vast network of catwalks, conveyor belts, and rusting machines, all wrapped in an eerie quiet. James took his time photographing the light leaking through shattered skylights, illuminating clouds of dust that hung motionless in the air. But around 6:45 p.m., he heard it, a faint, distant voice. At first, he thought it was a bird or some wind distortion, but then it repeated, clearer this time. Over here. The voice was soft, feminine, confused. James paused, frowning. Was someone else inside? "Hello?" he called out. His voice bounced back at him a dozen times over in ghostly repetition. There was no response, but after a few seconds, he heard it again. "Help me." He followed the sound deeper into the factory. The building seemed to get colder the farther he went. His flashlight flickered for a moment, then steadied. He chalked it up to cheap batteries. But then came the second voice. This one lower, almost a whisper right in his ear. "She's waiting for you." James spun around. No one. He took a breath and kept walking. Every so often, the woman's voice would call out again, always just beyond the next doorway or staircase. Always pleading. "Please don't leave me here." Eventually, he reached the back of the factory, where a staircase led down into what had once been the furnace room. The walls were blackened with soot, and the air was oppressively hot despite the evening chill. A faint humming sound began to pulse through the floor, like machinery still running deep underground. Then he saw it. Standing at the far end of the furnace room was a woman, pale, dressed in an old factory uniform, her skin nearly translucent under the flickering light above. She wasn't moving, just standing, staring straight ahead. James hesitated. He called out to her, "Ma'am, are you okay?" No answer, just the echo. He stepped closer, and she turned. Her eyes were wrong, deep black hollows with no light. Her jaw hung slightly open, and a slow, distorted version of her earlier voice came from her throat. "You heard me. You followed." James turned and bolted. Behind him, the humming grew louder, mixed with metallic shrieks and the sound of clanging machinery. The stairs seemed longer than before. When he finally reached the main level again, the air was ice cold. All the machinery he had seen earlier was now moving, belts spinning, gears turning, though none of it had power. The voices were all around him now. Not just hers, dozens, maybe hundreds, overlapping. Angry, desperate, lost. "Stay with us. Don't leave again. You're one of us now." James sprinted toward the exit, dodging moving parts and ducking under pipes that hissed with steam. As he reached the open bay door, he felt something grab the back of his jacket. A hand, ice cold and brittle. He tore free, stumbled outside, and didn't stop running until he was 2 blocks away. The factory loomed behind him, dark once again. Later, when he checked his camera, every photo he had taken after entering the furnace room was gone, replaced with static white blur or completely black frames. But on the final photo, taken right before he ran, there was a blurry, pale face staring into the lens. Too close. Too detailed. James never returned to Milltown. But sometimes, when reviewing his recent shots at home, strange whispers would come through his speakers. Sometimes soft, sometimes angry, always familiar. And every now and then in the corner of a frame, just barely visible, he could see her. Watching. Waiting. Story 3. The Theater Whispers. I used to do urban exploration as a hobby in my early 20s. There was something irresistible about crawling through forgotten places, peeling paint and crumbling bricks, whispering old secrets. But it wasn't until I stepped into the derelict Palisade Theater that I started to question whether some places should just be left to rot. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon in early November when I first spotted the old building. Tucked between two renovated apartment complexes, the Palisade Theater stood like a corpse at a wedding, forgotten, unwanted, yet somehow still drawing attention. The marquee had long since lost its letters, and ivy had begun consuming the front entrance like nature itself was trying to erase it. My friend Lenny bailed at the last minute, so I went in alone. In hindsight, that was the first mistake. I found an open side door, half rusted off its hinges, and pushed through into complete darkness. The smell hit me first. Mildew, rot, and something else, like charred wood and old perfume. I flicked on my flashlight, revealing a long hallway with dusty velvet wallpaper, some of it curling off like dead skin. I made way toward the main theater room, stepping over broken glass and soggy programs too faded to read. The heavy double doors opened with a moan straight out of a horror movie. The auditorium was a cathedral of decay. The red seats were torn and moldy, some missing entirely. The stage curtain, once royal and proud, now hung in tatters. Yet, even in that stillness, the space hummed with a presence. I climbed onto the stage. Something about standing there alone under the faint beam of my flashlight made the silence feel too loud. That's when I heard it. Just barely. A whisper. It was a woman's voice. Faint, melodic, singing. I froze, every muscle in my body going tight. I scanned the rows of broken seats. Nothing. Just shadows dancing at the edge of my light. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, but then it came again. Louder this time. A lullaby. Hush now, darling. Close your eyes. It echoed off the walls in a way that no wind ever could, and it was coming from backstage. I should have left right then and there. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pulled me toward the wings. Behind the curtain, the backstage area was cluttered with props, old wardrobes, and broken light rigs. I stepped carefully, my flashlight sweeping through decades of dust and forgotten dreams. The voice stopped. Dead silence. Then, a single door creaked open down the hall. I slowly approached. It was a dressing room. Mirrors with shattered bulbs, rusted chairs, and makeup still smeared across broken countertops. I stepped in. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, grabbing the handle, yanking with all my strength. It wouldn't budge. Then the lights flickered on. Not my flashlight, the overhead bulbs. All of them, flickering erratically like a dying heartbeat. And in the mirror, I saw her. A woman. Pale, draped in an old-fashioned gown, her hair pinned in vintage curls. She stood behind me, unmoving. Her lips didn't move, but her voice was in my ear. Why did you leave me on stage? I whipped around. No one. But the mirror still showed her, and this time, her eyes were bleeding. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The bulbs exploded above me, glass raining down. The room went dark again. I screamed for help, banging on the door. Suddenly, it swung open on its own. I ran. I didn't care what I tripped over. I sprinted back through the theater, the whispering now surrounding me. It wasn't just the woman anymore. There were others. Dozens of voices, muttering, singing, sobbing. As I reached the hallway, I swear I felt cold fingers graze the back of my neck. I burst out the side door and into the rain, gasping like I'd been underwater. I didn't stop running until I reached my car 3 blocks away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that lullaby in my head, over and over. The next day, I tried to find information about the Palisade Theater. An article from 1961 caught my eye. There had been a fire, one that started during a performance. The lead actress vanished that night. They never found her body. Witnesses said she was last seen backstage, putting on makeup, waiting for her cue. She never made it to the stage. I've never been back. Not to the theater. Not to any abandoned place. That was the last time I ever went exploring. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear her song. And I wonder if maybe I brought part of the Palisade home with me. Story 4, The Forgotten Asylum. I was 19 when I made the worst decision of my life. There's an abandoned asylum about 40 minutes from where I grew up in upstate New York. Willow Ridge Asylum. Everyone knew about it. Everyone had a story. Kids used to dare each other to break in at night and wander the crumbling halls. I was one of those kids. But I didn't go with a group. I went alone. It started on a cold October night when I heard that a few college students had gone in the week before and swore they heard voices. Children's voices. Laughing and calling out in the dark. That same week, one of the guys reportedly never came back. Most people said he just chickened out and ran off. But there were whispers that something had followed him out. That he was found days later, wandering barefoot down a highway, muttering something over and over. They want you to hear them. That line stuck with me. I don't know why I became obsessed. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was something darker. I just couldn't stop thinking about the place. So one night, I grabbed my flashlight, my old Nikon camera, and a recorder, and I drove to Willow Ridge. The place was even worse in person. Overgrown weeds strangled the front gate. Every window was broken. The air smelled like rust and mildew. And the silence was unbearable, except for the wind howling through the hollow halls. I climbed through a shattered basement window and landed in what I think was once the laundry room. Everything inside had rotted. Black mold bloomed across the walls. Pieces of furniture lay splintered on the ground, and graffiti covered every inch of space. For the first hour, nothing happened. I walked through the ruins with my flashlight and took pictures. Then I pulled out the recorder and said something stupid like, "If anyone's here, say something." I played it back. Silence. I made my way upstairs to what used to be the children's wing. Everything was smaller, tiny beds with rusted frames, cracked murals of cartoon animals on the walls. That's when I heard the first voice. It was faint. A giggle. I stopped cold. I wasn't sure if it was in my head or outside of it. "Hello?" I called. Silence. Then, closer this time, "Come play." It sounded like a child, no more than 6 or 7. My blood turned to ice. I scanned the hallway, but no one was there. Still, I followed the sound. Deeper into the children's wing, into a room at the end of the hall where the door was halfway open. The walls were smeared with something. I want to say it was dirt. I want to believe it was dirt. Inside the room, an old rocking horse sat facing the window. As I stepped in, it began to rock. I tried to rationalize it. Wind, vibration, something natural. Then the recorder in my pocket clicked on by itself. I yanked it out and stared at it. It was recording. I hadn't touched a thing. That's when I heard footsteps. Small, quick, running behind me. I spun around. Nothing. I started backing out of the room when I heard the whisper again, right next to my ear. "Stay." I bolted. I sprinted through the hallway, heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I was back in the main lobby. That's when the lights came on. I swear on everything I know, the ceiling lights flickered to life, faint, buzzing, yellow. They shouldn't have. The power had been off for years. Then I saw them. Down the corridor, just past the nurse's station. Figures, children, dozens of them. Standing shoulder to shoulder, watching me. Their eyes weren't right, black, sunken. Their mouths slightly open like they were about to speak, and then they did, all at once. A chorus of voices whispering in unison. "Stay, with us, forever." I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran. I don't even remember crawling through the window or getting back in my car. I just remember screaming down the highway, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. When I got home, I checked the photos I took. Most were blurry or completely black, except for one. In the shot of the rocking horse room, right behind the horse, near the window, was a small figure, a child. Its face was pale, mouth wide in a grin that stretched far too long, eyes pitch black. And on the audio recorder, there was only one file. I pressed play. Silence, then static, then a whisper. "We heard you." Some places are abandoned for a reason, and the voices that echo inside them are not always echoes of the living. Whether it's a whisper in a forgotten hallway or a child's voice in an empty room, the stories tonight remind us that curiosity has a price. If you've ever heard your name called when no one was there, you might already know it. Keep your ears open, but don't always follow what you hear.